This episode is brought to you by LifeLock. The holidays mean more travel, more shopping, more time online, and more personal info in places that could expose you to identity theft. That's why LifeLock monitors millions of data points every second. If your identity is stolen, their US-based restoration specialist will fix it, guaranteed or your money back. Get more holiday fun and less holiday worry with LifeLock. Save up to 40% your first year. Visit LifeLock.com/podcast. Terms apply.
When it comes to towing, seeing is believing. That's why Chevy Truck's advanced camera technology offers up to 8 available cameras for 14 unique views, so you can focus on the view that really matters. Chevrolet, together let's drive. Learn more about Chevy Trucks at Chevy.com. Safety or driver assistance features are no substitute for the driver's responsibility to operate the vehicle in a safe manner. Read the vehicle owner's manual for important feature limitations and information.
What's up, everyone? Welcome to the Big Ten Football Talk Podcast. I'm your host, Zach Guggenheim. I'm going to be reacting to the college football playoff first round. Make sure to like, follow, subscribe wherever you get your podcast, Apple, Spotify, YouTube. Again, we're going to be covering the playoffs, the bowl games. A quick addendum to what I said on my last episode. We will be doing bowl game picks tomorrow. That's Tuesday. This is dropping on Monday. I need a little bit more time to actually think through the bowl games before I record. But I wanted to react to the playoffs and not just to the playoffs, but some of the commentary around the playoffs since everybody has an opinion that is mostly stupid. But no offense to people who have good, well-informed opinions. But there's just a lot of just terrible narratives out there that I want to talk about. But I also want to talk about the games. And that's what we're going to do on this episode. First things first, my picks were hot garbage. And I'm going to own that. And like I was off, like my feel for every game was off. Like I thought Indiana was going to upset Notre Dame. Hilariously wrong. I thought Penn State SMU would be the closest game. I think it actually probably had the potential to be, but Kevin Jennings just threw another interception for a pick six. So that didn't happen. Clemson pushed Texas a little bit, and I'll talk about that. Not that that's a Big Ten team, a set of Big Ten teams, but Clemson did push Texas the most, I think, out of anybody. But ultimately, Texas was the better team. Texas shut down the run, and they were able to run all over what was, I think, a porous Clemson defense. And then I picked Tennessee to beat Ohio State. Tennessee stinks, man. Like, and I say that a bit begrudgingly or facetiously, I should say. I think Tennessee's a pretty good team. Ohio State they rebounded from what was an embarrassing loss. And it was an embarrassing loss. But I think there's just my read on every game was wrong. And so I want to own that because I hate it when bloggers and podcasters and sports media say whatever they want. And then, there's no consequences. I'll just be straight up. I was hot garbage, but I want to break these games down. I'll start with the Friday night game, Notre Dame, Indiana. I thought the way that Indiana was going to, win this game was if they were able to force Notre Dame out of their comfort zone. And so it looked good early, first couple minutes, right? When I say early, first couple minutes, they get a pick on Riley Leonard and they get that ridiculous catch by Elijah Surratt, right? Get down into the red zone or close to the red zone, and Curtis Rourke throws just a ghastly pick, right? He throws into essentially triple coverage. He had a guy open in on the hitch route, ignores him, tries to go downfield, and Xavier Watts, who's a stud, by the way, just it picks it off. And right after that, Jeremiah Love goes 98 yards. I hate to say it, but that was the game at that point, because everybody knew, including me, that Notre Dame was the more talented team from top to bottom. And I even said, I think on this show and on the Big Ten Huddle, that if like Notre Dame, out of the two teams, Notre Dame has the better shot to beat Georgia. And at this point, I am probably picking Notre Dame over Georgia because I just don't think Georgia is as good as people think. And I'll get to that a little bit in a minute. But the issue with Notre Dame is they are a little one-dimensional. But if they can just play that run game and they don't have to worry about catch-up, like, forget it, man. Like, you're just not going to beat Notre Dame. And so as soon as Notre Dame got up 7-0, and then Indiana got down again, they couldn't move the ball. And I thought Indiana played tight and scared kind of after that point. And Notre Dame just kind of sat on them and they leaned on them, and it was over. I mean, now there's some narratives though that I want to dispel. So everybody's saying like Notre Dame was just so much better than Indiana outside of the 98-yard touchdown run, which you have to factor in. I'm not saying don't factor it in, but outside of the 98-yard touchdown run, they had 34 carries for 105 yards. So like Indiana's defense played really well. You know, they held Riley Leonard to 6.3 yards per attempt. Not bad, right? Like, so again, outside of a 98-yard run, they played really well defensively. And I think anybody who says otherwise is just fooling themselves. The problem was Indiana could not run the ball. And Curtis Rourke chose a terrible time to have his second worst game, maybe in his career, at least this season. He was not good. He was not sharp. He wasn't seeing the field well. And it wasn't that he always had pressure in his face either. You know, the Ohio State game was a little different for him in that I felt like he just never had time. The crowd was certainly a factor at Notre Dame. That was more of a factor than I expected because I thought Indiana fans would show up en masse. Instead, that was reserved for Tennessee going to Columbus. But in general, I thought Curtis Rourke played tentative. I thought he made poor decisions. And it was uncharacteristic because I thought Curtis Rourke all season long had played poised. And this was just uncharacteristic for him. I don't think that takes away from what he's done this season. I think he's a fine quarterback prospect, a really good player. But the reality is he had a bad game, and that killed any chance for them to have a really, really good opportunity to upset Notre Dame. I do want to talk briefly about some of the narratives of this game. Particularly afterwards. I think Sean McDonough should be ashamed of himself. The way that he talked about Indiana at the end of this game. The way that he talked about how, quite frankly, there should be other teams that should be considered besides Indiana. Like, listen, dude, the playoff is meant for people who earned their way in. Their performance is not a referendum on whether they should have been included. And so for Sean McDonough or Paul Feinbaum or any of these other hacks, including Kirk freaking Herbstreit, who needs to shut his mouth, this was not a referendum on whether Indiana belonged. And we'll get to their prized SEC cow in a few minutes, by the way. But this is not a referendum on that. The fact is, Indiana, they had a path to victory in this game. They just blew it. They didn't play well. And you know what? Sometimes teams don't play well. Go look at 2016 Ohio State. Go look at 2018 Alabama in the national championship game. Go look at Ohio State in 2020. Go look at Michigan State in 2015. The list goes on and on and on and on. It's not a referendum on a team if they don't show up or they don't do well. Now, you can say all you want that Indiana was outmatched and out-physicaled. Sure. Okay. Sometimes that doesn't matter in a game like this. Sometimes you still pull off the upset. Sometimes you still do it. And you know what? Good for Indiana being here. That's the point of expansion. It's not to give Alabama and Ole Miss and all these other teams more mulligans because they decided to suck for a couple weekends. It is for teams who have fought hard, who have won the games. And it's not, this is not a measure of, well, you are what your record says, or, people will say, you can't say you are what your record is. That's not what this is. What this is Alabama decided to suck for 2 weeks when they shouldn't have. And you know who didn't? Indiana. You know who didn't lose to 6-6 and 7-5 teams? Indiana. So they deserve to be there. Maybe like Alabama, don't lose to 6-6 Oklahoma and 6-6 Vandy. Okay. Like Ole Miss, maybe don't lose to 4-8 Kentucky. Right? Like, this is stupid. Like, Alabama was not deserving. And if you want any proof of that, go look at what Ohio State just did to Tennessee, who beat Alabama. Indiana put up a better fight against Ohio State than Tennessee did. I just have no time for it. Indiana deserved to be there. They deserve to be in. And you know what? If they don't screw the pooch in the first couple drives, they put pressure on Notre Dame, and that game is different. Now, to anyone who says, yeah, and Indiana had the lowest point differential. No, you can't do that either. Okay, you got to tell the whole story, right? The whole story is Indiana got blown out. Okay, it's 27-3, and then Indiana scored a couple of garbage time touchdowns. So it was not a great game, right? Not a good game for Indiana, and I can see why people are using the narrative and saying the narrative that Indiana didn't belong. I think Indiana's defense was really good in this game, and I think if the offense could have been more effective or could have changed up things, it would have been different. But I thought Cignetti honestly coached a little scared. I thought Curtis Rourke was seeing ghosts a little bit, and they looked like a team who has never been in this situation before. And Curt Cignetti looked like a coach who's never been in this situation before. So I think ultimately my takeaway, I have a couple takeaways. One is that Indiana did have a talent deficiency. And I think that's what we've been saying, is that Indiana is kind of punching up. I think you reward that. I don't think you take the playoff away from them because they actually did something that other teams didn't. But I think it's okay to acknowledge that. It's okay to acknowledge that. I think the second thing is, and Indiana, I think it's been a great run. Your coach needs to shut his mouth. The whole bravado thing of Purdue sucks and so does Michigan and Ohio State. It worked in the beginning because you're trying to spur on, momentum, right? That's what you're trying to do. But when you go to Notre Dame's campus and you say, all we do is beat top 25 teams, when they haven't beaten one, don't do that. Because then the top 25 teams are going to have a chip on their shoulder and they'll be like, who is this guy? And that's exactly what Notre Dame did, is they did not let Indiana beat them. They suffocated them. This game could have been worse, but I think Indiana's defense played above its skis, but I also think Notre Dame, they played their style and they were just content. So I think that's the takeaway. Notre Dame also is one of the best teams in the country. Okay. So that's the other thing. All these people coming out of the woodwork saying Alabama would beat both of these teams by 3 touchdowns. Shut up. I think Alabama would have lost by a couple scores to Notre Dame. I saw nothing. I don't know if I've seen anything from Alabama that makes me think Notre Dame would struggle with them. Maybe Ryan Williams, maybe. But last time I checked, Jalen Milroe on the road has sucked. So I don't care, right? I think Notre Dame would have beat Alabama. I think they would have beat Ole Miss. If Ole Miss played their best, maybe Ole Miss beats them. But I think Notre Dame would be favored. Sagarin and FPI, I believe, both have Notre Dame above both those teams. So like they can zip it. Okay. All that being said, it was a great season for Indiana. There's nothing to take away from, you don't take anything away from this like some people are trying to do. They went 11-2 in a power conference, or 11-1 in a power conference. And yes, there was a schedule disparity. And should that be considered for future? Yeah, it should. And their strength of schedule was abysmal. And other teams did have better strength of schedule. For the people who are saying they didn't deserve to be there and that you have to consider strength of schedule, it was considered. Don't lose to 6-6 teams. Don't lose to 7-5 teams. It's pretty simple. Okay? Indiana deserved it. And if they had been more, I think not engaged. I think they were engaged. If they were more locked in and were able to score first, I think this game is somewhat different. Which leads to the second game, which is Penn State SMU. I said it was going to be the best game of the four. I'll say this: it was the most even competition in this sense. Penn State's defense scored 14 points, and Penn State's offense scored 24. So 24-14 is pretty good. In all seriousness, 38-10. Penn State was defensively phenomenal in this game. But again, a lot of people say, well, SMU doesn't belong. No, Kevin Jennings had a bad day. Let's say this for what it is. SMU had a bad day, or Kevin Jennings had a bad day. What happens if he is able to get that 4th and 1 conversion? What happens if he throws that ball on 4th and 1 and it's a touchdown instead of a 4th down turnover? Because Penn State was not moving the ball for the first 25 minutes. Drew Aller, honestly, was below average in this game. 127 yards on 22 attempts, 13-22 passing, only averaged 5.8 yards per attempt. Right? The running game really didn't get started until the second half. They averaged less than 5 yards a carry, which is what I said going into this game. SMU's defense, their rush defense in particular, is going to make this a challenge for Penn State. And they did. They did. The problem is SMU couldn't run the ball. Kevin Jennings, when he wasn't getting picked off, he was sacked. He was, fumbles, all types of stuff. SMU had the roster to compete with Penn State. Again, I still think Penn State would have won. It really helped that it was a home game. But let's be honest. A pick in the end zone by SMU and then 2 pick sixes, that's a 21-point swing. That's the difference, is a 21-point swing, right? A touchdown going the other way and 2 touchdowns going that way. That's if you reverse all that, guess what? SMU is right there. You're talking about 24-17 instead of 38-10. And so all these takes about how SMU didn't belong, it's one game. It's their first time in this environment, and they're on the road in one of the most hostile environments at all. And your main takeaway is, well, SMU doesn't belong. No. That's not how this works, guys. Sometimes teams blow it. And that's what happened with SMU. SMU, I think, was more competitive than, I think SMU was more equated with Penn State than Indiana was with Notre Dame. I think Indiana needed the right script to win this game. For SMU, here was the script: don't turn the ball over. If SMU doesn't turn the ball over, Penn State, that crowd is taken out of it. And I think that's my concern from Penn State moving forward is Boise State, I don't think is a great team. But they've got a dude at running back in Ashton Jeanty. And I'll just say this. I think Penn State's one of the top 5 teams in the country when Drew Aller plays like he did against Oregon. But when he's below average, that's going to be really tough. Like I am concerned. And my takeaway is, yes, Penn State dominated this game. They won by 28. But you need to understand that this was not the blowout that you think it was, right? Good for them getting pick sixes, but that you can't depend on that every game. And they are going to need to get more out of Drew Aller moving forward. They need to figure out what they're going to do. I still think they're talented, and I still think they're a top 5 team, but they can't have another offensive stinker like they did, because that was in the balance. And if not for a couple of really good defensive plays and at quarterback imploding, this is a very different conversation today. So I think they've got to figure out how to get more explosive plays in the pass game, which I think that's been the conversation throughout. They got to get Tyler Warren more involved. Like, Tyler Warren had 1 carry for 6 yards. He had 4 catches. I do think they were probably holding a little back. Right? Like, you're in your own environment. You get up 14-0 quick, or not quick, but you're up 14-0 in the second quarter. Then you get up 21-0. Then you get up 20, and then you're like, okay, I can kind of take, I can be a little bit. I don't have to be as creative, but I'll just warn you that I think Penn State has to be careful moving forward. They've got to get more production from that quarterback spot, and they've got to be able to throw to give more room for their running back, Singleton and Allen. I thought, once they got going and once they kind of were able to stay on the field a little bit more, then, they wore SMU down, which is not surprising, right? But I just think I am concerned about Ashton Jeanty being kind of an all-world running back and Penn State having to face them, because I don't think they faced an elite talent at running back like that. He's certainly the best running back they'll have faced. Maybe Jeremiah Smith in terms of like overall ability, maybe like Tez Johnson at Oregon, but like Ashton Jeanty's going to be one of the best individual talents they've faced all year. And what happens if they get down 7-0 or 14-0 against Boise, right? Everybody's assuming that's a win for Penn State. Just be careful. Be careful. Because I think Penn State is good enough. Penn State's good enough to win the national championship. They're also, they can play down to their competition. And I think that was I feel like coming away from SMU, I think, yes, Penn State defensively dominated this game. Also, and I think, sorry, this is one other thing I'll say. I say that Kevin Jennings imploded. I do want to give Penn State a lot of credit for the pressure. I mean, Abdul Carter, Dennis Sutton, those boys were flying around. Tony Rojas was awesome in this game. Dominic DeLuca with his 2 picks, phenomenal in this game. Zane Durant, phenomenal in this game. I mean, they sacked, they got 3 sacks, had a ton of pressures. So like Izzard was great, 1.5 tackles for loss. So a lot of guys contributed, and that's why the big reason why Jennings imploded. But just understand, like a quarterback with more poise, what happened to Penn State was playing Cade Klubnik. I think it could have been different. That's all I'm saying, is it could have been different. That being said, Penn State got a big time win. I think it's a big deal for Penn State getting a playoff win. And I was listening to Kings of the North, Doug Lesmerises, Bill Landis. Those guys are awesome, by the way. Make sure you like and subscribe to them. But they made the point, like, the playoff is especially great for teams like Penn State, because I think for a long time people have been like, well, James Franklin stinks. I saw someone tweet saying the fact that Penn State's getting a playoff win means that this playoff is too big. And listen, I think it's great for the sport because like the national championship is great, but getting in the playoff and making progress in the playoff is going to be huge for programs. And I think for Penn State, this was a needed win to say, hey, Penn State can win a playoff game. They're a playoff caliber team. I think that makes them more attractive. I think it gives the fans something more than just, no offense, a meaningless bowl game. And people can say all they want, well, SMU didn't belong. Well, you know what? Penn State proved that they did belong. Right? No one's going to take that away from them. So I thought Penn State, again, I said there's a lot of cracks in this for me. But at the same time, I feel good for Penn State. I feel good for their fans. I feel good for the whole program. And they still have a very legitimate path, at least to the semis, if not to win the whole thing, right? Like they were right there with Oregon. I think Oregon's the best team in the country. I'll go real quick to Clemson and Texas, which is just simply, I don't think Texas is as good as people think they are. And also Clemson's defense is awful. Like Clemson's defense is really bad. Quinn Ewers was okay. He was decent, but it was really on the backs of the running backs, right? Those runners, they averaged 6.1 yards per carry, a couple of big runs. Jaden Blue had a 77-yard touchdown. But the thing that alarms me is like Clemson's receivers are good. They're young. They're good. I mean, they kind of challenged Texas in the second half. And I mean, really challenged. TJ Moore and Antonio Williams, like those guys really challenged. And I don't think Texas will be challenged against Arizona State. I think Texas beats. But I'm not so sure that they have the ability to defend a team with the skill that either Oregon or Ohio State have. That was my big takeaway from the Clemson-Texas game. And the reality is Clemson's defense is awful. I mean, part of the reason why I picked Clemson was I knew that Texas doesn't have the greatest running back room. But the reality is that they really, how do I say this? Clemson was kind of the same team that they've been, which is, they can be good on offense and they can struggle on defense, right? If you go back, when they played Louisville, Louisville ran all over them. I think it was Isaac Brown, 20 carries, 151 yards. Okay. Ran kind of roughshod on him. You look at other teams and what they've done. They've struggled defensively at times. And this was no different. And so I thought Texas certainly played, they played well enough to win. It's 31-24 in the fourth quarter. And yes, Texas put it away. But I'm like, man, Phil Maffa was hurt at running back. I think Texas is clearly a better team than Clemson. What's Clemson going to do when they face the offensive buzzsaw that could be Ohio State and is Oregon? Which leads me to Ohio State, Tennessee. If you want to know why Ohio State fans are frustrated about the loss to Michigan, watch Ohio State just demoralize Tennessee. Because this was a butt whooping of epic proportions. The reality is that it really was, before they scored that junk touchdown, it was 42-3 with a touchdown aided by, or 42-7 with a field goal aided by the refs. Because there were calls in this game. There was a roughing the passer call that was a tackle. It was a sack. Or no, it wasn't a sack. It was essentially a tackle. He got the ball off, and it was a pick. And instead, they called it roughing the passer. And you know it's bad when Kirk Herbstreit is even saying, I don't think there's anything there. And then Bill LeMonier is like, yeah, there was nothing there. So Tennessee there was bad calls both ways. I don't want to just blame refs. But the reality is this was a beatdown of epic proportions. And before, just to get into it, Tennessee, I think, had less yards against Ohio State than Indiana did against Notre Dame. So just putting that out there for those of you who are like, oh, Indiana wasn't very good. They don't deserve to be in the playoff. Well, guess what? Tennessee doesn't either then, which, by the way, I think Tennessee does. I think Tennessee would beat Indiana on a neutral field. Though Sagarin doesn't think so. Interesting. But I think Tennessee would beat Indiana on a neutral field. I think it would be competitive. I think Tennessee's pretty good, which is why it's frustrating that Ohio State lost to Michigan. But, and here's the big but, this is the best Ohio State's looked all season. This is against a defense that is one of the top defenses in the country. They have an All-American corner. They have phenomenal defensive linemen. And they looked like they were a JV squad. This is why Ohio State fans are ticked off about the loss to Michigan. Because what Ohio State did in this game was they did what we've wanted them to do for the last 12 games, which I will say, as they were talking about it on the broadcast, there is a reality that Chip Kelly and Ryan Day both have NFL pedigrees, and now we're going to a more NFL-like schedule where you have a potential 3 to 4 playoff game run. And so they've got to figure out how to deal with the Michigan thing. But I'll tell you what, TreVeyon Henderson looked faster than he's looked. Like, he just looked fresh. The game plan was phenomenal. And I'm not sure anybody beats this version of Ohio State if that's what is on the field for the rest of the season. And I know I'm wearing my Ohio State sweatshirt right now. I feel confident. I don't know who I'll pick with Oregon and Ohio State because I truly believe this. If that's the version of Ohio State and we get peak Oregon, that's the national championship game in the Rose Bowl. I think whoever wins that game wins the Natty at this point. And I still am leaning Oregon in that game just because I don't know how to unsee the last game when they had their full offensive line with 2 potential first-round picks in Seth McLaughlin and Josh Simmons. But here's the reality. If Ohio State unlocks what they unlocked, which is you've got TreVeyon Henderson hitting holes, you've got Emeka and Jeremiah Smith just able to roam free. Carnell Tate had 1 target in this game. That's how wide open their first 2 options were. You had G. Scott making plays. You had Judkins out of the backfield, Henderson out of the backfield. But even more impressive, the defense. Ohio State's defense was just phenomenal. They held Nico Iamaleava to 3.4 yards per attempt. Like, they forced the quarterback to run 20 times for 2.4 yards. And by the way, that kid is strong. He is shifty. He's 6'6". They said it probably 20 times on the broadcast. 6'6". He's big, but he's shifty. And they could not, that was their only offensive plan. If we're being honest, that was all they could do. Brew McCoy, he's a good receiver. Squirrel White, Dante Thornton, they're good receivers. They're not great, but they're good enough. They did nothing. Now, they were battling injuries, and that's, it's important to note that they were battling injuries, but this was a very good Tennessee team. Make no mistake about it. All of my, sass about, well, if Indiana shouldn't be in, Tennessee shouldn't be in. I don't mean that because I think it's stupid what we're saying about Indiana. The reality is Tennessee deserved to be in. If they checked all the boxes, they had only had 2 losses. They beat a top 25 team. They were good enough to be in this thing. And honestly, I think they are good enough to, they could have been good enough to pull an upset against Ohio State. Not against this Ohio State team. Not the one I saw on the field. And listen, that 17, the only reason why 10 points are on the board, 3 is because of the refs, and 7 is because they put their backups in. Like, this was a total beatdown by the Buckeyes. And I think the winner of Oregon, Ohio State goes on to win it all. I really do. And I think the narrative after this weekend, I think, should be simple. The Big Ten is legit. The Big Ten's legit. And Penn State and Ohio State make it so, right? Sean McDonough at the end of the Indiana game was ripping the Big Ten, saying they're just like everybody else. No, brother, they're not. They're not. Indiana is no offense, the 4th best team in the Big Ten. And they played maybe a top 3 or a top 5 team in Notre Dame in the country. Tennessee is the 3rd best team in the SEC, and they played the 2nd best team in the Big Ten. Not nearly as even, as uneven, right? And they got their doors blown off. I don't want to hear it. I just don't want to hear it. Tennessee's a good team with a good young quarterback with a really good defense. Ohio State's pretty good. Penn State, I think, is pretty good. And I think Oregon's the best team in the country. They got to sit at home. And I think if you're Georgia or if you're Texas and you're like, well, we have the SEC to rely on, here's what I would tell you. I think your defenses are good because the offenses in the SEC stink. Like, Georgia didn't do this to Tennessee. And Tennessee went to Georgia. Georgia's farther away than Ohio State. Like, just saying. Ohio State was phenomenal in this game. Like, I can't say it enough. And I've given Ryan Day a lot of crap for him to get his team ready, for him to get them fired up like this. I think was phenomenal. So I'm going to end on this note and then kind of moving forward what it means for the playoff. There are a couple things that are just really terrible takes. And then I want to get on something that Kirk Herbstreit said that I think needs to be addressed. One is that I think anybody who's saying that the 12-team playoff stinks because every game was lopsided, I think you just hate college football. Because how many of these games have we seen throughout the years and you're all saying, well, this devalues the regular season? No, it doesn't. You know what's awesome? Indiana got to be in a playoff game this year. SMU got to be in a playoff game this year. 30 years ago, if you told the Indiana Hoosiers that there's going to be a playoff and they were going to be in the inaugural 12-team playoff, they would have thought you're nuts. But they were there. They got to be in the game. And you know what? That's going to help for future years. Like, as much as I don't like Curt Cignetti's brashness sometimes, you know what he can go back and sell? He can tell recruits and transfers, hey, come here. We'll get to the playoff. We've done it. It's what we're building towards. And you know what? Sometimes you get beat and you get blown out, and sometimes it's a program killer. Sometimes it's just the beginning, right? Sometimes it's just the beginning. I think this was a big, big step for Indiana to become a bigger program. Because you know what Kurt Cignetti can do now? He's like, hey, you want us to go and win a playoff game? You know what we need? We need more resources. We need better coaching. You know, we need to be able to pay our coaches more. We need to be able to get our NIL going. We need to upgrade our facilities. Big deal. It's a big deal. For Penn State, it's a huge deal. They had never been in the playoff before. They never got a shot. Even when they beat Ohio State and won the Big Ten, they did not get a shot. Now they do. And you know what? They can sell that to recruits. They sell that to boosters. It's huge for these teams that have just been on the edge for so many years. And in a year that's as wide open as this, and it's super wide open, right? As much as I said Ohio State and Oregon, I think is a national championship game. It wouldn't shock me if I think Notre Dame, Penn State, Texas, Georgia, Ohio State, and Oregon, I think have legitimate shots to win the national championship. And they're still all in the thing. And who knows what happens with Boise and Ashton Genty, right? Who knows what happens to Arizona State and Scattaboo, right? I'm not saying they're gonna win, but they've got playmakers who can make things interesting. It's so exciting. So anyone saying, well, 12's too many, this is dumb. Listen, you're missing the point. You're missing the point. All these teams deserve to be in. This was never the playoffs should never be about the TV product. That's what people are upset about. They want to be entertained. Okay, cool. I want to be entertained too. But you know what matters more? The kids in those locker rooms, those programs, the fans, not the casual fans, but the fans of these teams who go out and support them. By the way, speaking of the fans, more home playoff games, please. Every environment was awesome. More home playoff games. I would do the first round and the quarters as home playoff games. I just get it done because that was awesome. I want more home playoff games. That was so cool. Let me just get to Kirk Herbstreit for a minute, because he decided to go on air on College Game Day and mention how much Indiana didn't belong. And then he doubled down on that take after he had just seen a demolition of a team that he had just watched, saying that Tennessee was fine, but Indiana in particular didn't deserve to be in the playoff. It should be about the best teams, not the most deserving teams. And that was after, and then he doubled down on that. And that was after, on the broadcast of Ohio State, that he decided to rip into the lunatic fringe. Exact words, by the way. The lunatic fringe of the Ohio State fan base, which has grown from 10% to maybe 15 to 20%, saying that Ryan Day should be fired.
Run a restaurant and you learn pretty quick. The sound of a crisp fry starts way before the first bite. As delivery and to-go keeps business booming,
Order for pickup.
McCain's SureCrisp fries keep orders crispy.
Hey, delivery.
After the trip, the crispiness comes through. McCain's SureCrisp fries. Go the distance. See how far our fries can take your business at surecrisp.com/delivery.
This episode is brought to you by NFL Sunday Ticket on YouTube TV. Catch every moment of your team's playoff push with NFL Sunday Ticket on YouTube TV. You'll get amazing features like multi-view, and right now, it's only $49 for the rest of the NFL regular season. So give yourself the ultimate gift this holiday season. Get NFL Sunday Ticket for $49. Sign up now at youtube.com/Sunday Ticket. Device and content restrictions apply. Local and national games on YouTube TV. NFL Sunday Ticket for out-of-market games excludes digital-only games.
Now, he didn't say Ryan Day should be fired. He was defending him, but he was ripping the fan base who was saying that Ryan Day should be fired, saying they were part of the lunatic fringe. It's bad, and it's a bad take when an opposing fan base, the Volunteers, Tennessee, came in defense of Ohio State and said Kirk Herbstreit was being unprofessional. That was on Twitter. Tennessee Twitter accounts were saying that. There's a lot I could say, but this is all I'm going to say. He has a responsibility to be fair and sober-minded with the platform that he has. And this was a failure. It is a failure by someone who I respected for a long time as one of the faces of this business. In many ways, Kirk Herbstreit is the face of college football, right? Former Ohio State quarterback. Incredibly knowledgeable. I think one of the best color analysts in the game, right? When he's not doing too much, which right now I think he's doing too much. But what he said both about Indiana and about the Ohio State fan base is completely uncalled for. Now, if you want to rip the Ohio State fans who go after Ryan Day's kids at school, yeah, that's a lunatic fringe, and that should be called out. But to lump them in together with a group of fans who are becoming more and more disgruntled because they've lost to their rival 4 years in a row, including to one of the worst Michigan teams we've seen in our lifetime, and you're going to lump them in with the people who make fun of Ryan Day's kids? Dude, it's irresponsible. It's absolutely irresponsible. You're an award-winning journalist or award-winning broadcaster. You hold the attention of a lot of people, and to rip on a fan base like that in the middle of a broadcast is just insane. And then to be so biased to completely ignore the shellacking of Tennessee, but then just turn your attention that your main takeaway is teams like Indiana shouldn't be in. How dare you? It's irresponsible, and it's indefensible. And it's what is tiring about covering the sport is not the personalities playing the game or coaching the game. It's the media personalities who clearly have an agenda and then say, we don't have an agenda. We don't have a bias. Of course you do. You're ESPN. You own the rights to the SEC. You own the rights to the playoff. And you know what Indiana did? It took away a spot from your precious SEC, and they didn't have a as watchable game as you would have liked. And so what do? You rip them. You rip them because they're not part of your prized cash cow, and they made your playoff not look as pretty. Let's call it for what it is. You know what? If Indiana were Michigan, I guarantee you wouldn't have said anything. If Indiana were Florida, I guarantee you wouldn't have said anything. But they were Indiana. And so you needed them to perform well. Otherwise, it was going to be a dud, ratings and otherwise. Because Indiana's it's not a helmet team. It's not a logo team. It's not a brand team. Right? So, let's just call it what it is. You guys have a company line that you're fighting for because you want to make the margins. And it's ridiculous. Now, do I know that for sure? No, I don't. And even as I'm saying this, I'm like, I don't want to overstate. Here's the point. Here's where I want to go with this. I don't actually know why Kirk said what he said. And I think he's entitled to his opinion. I think he's entitled to his opinion. I'm backtracking a little bit here, but here's where I want to land. I think Kirk's really good at his job. And he's got the biggest platform. And this was an irresponsible use of it in every way, both with Indiana and with ripping the Ohio State fan base. And it requires more nuance. It requires more thought. And this was a failure by ESPN and Kirk Herbstreit. And he needs to be held accountable. And so does ESPN. And they won't, I doubt, or at least I doubt they will. But this was a failure. And if the reality is, if they continue to talk like this, one of two things is going to happen. One is people are going to buy it and they're going to regurgitate the same crap. And we're going to start getting 8-4 Alabama in over 11-1 Indiana's, Michigan State's, SMU's, Duke's, because 8-4 Alabama is better than everybody, right? That's what we're going to get. Or people are going to start rejecting it and they're going to lose viewership, which I think is already starting to happen, by the way. Either way, I wish someone would hold them accountable. And I think Joel Klatt has, and I appreciate that. I think other guys are trying to hold them accountable. But it was irresponsible and indefensible. I shouldn't, and I need to own this. It was irresponsible of me to go after the why, because I don't know the why, and that's a fight I shouldn't pick. But I'll pick this fight. I'll pick the fight that this was indefensible and irresponsible by someone who has a lot of influence and a lot of power, and he knows what he's saying, and it's unfair and unhelpful. So, all that being said, this is a great week. It's a great weekend for college football. Great weekend for the Big Ten. 3 Big Ten teams still in this thing, and a chance to get 2 into the semis. There's still a dream to have 2 Big Ten teams in the national championship. How sweet would that be? How sweet would it be? That'll do it for the Big Ten Football Talk podcast. Christmas Eve, we will do. I'll do some sort of breakdown of the other bowl games. I gotta go and look and see who else has opted out at this point. But until then, take care. God bless.